Hello.
I'm
How's
in.
it going?
Good, good. How are you? I guess we're probably ready to get started. Thank you
Yep.
so much, everyone, for joining our Chenango County Candidate Forum, and thank you so much to the organizers from all three parties. But let's go ahead and get started. We have Senator Fred Akshar on the line here, and we also have Thomas Queter. Tucker, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure thing. So this session is a little bit unique. As you can see, we have an additional panelist. So for those that are not aware, I'm actually Tom Queter's campaign manager, and Emmanuel Priest is Fred Actor's campaign manager. Way back when we were talking with Carol and the Chenango County parties, they had wished to put on their usual candidate forum, but were not able to do so virtually. So we offered to help them out today in the vein of fairness. We have promoted Emmanuel to also be a co-host, but we're running this session just like we ran all the other sessions. So for those of you that are just joining us, that means that we will start with open-ended 15-minute opening statements from both candidates. We will follow it with questions and answers from the audience members like you. And then again, we also have some general questions if we do not have any questions from audience members, though of course we would prefer to have questions from audience members. And we'll close out with 3 minutes of closing statements. So we will start off with opening statement from Tom Queter, the Libertarian candidate.
Hello, I'm Tom Queter. I'm the Libertarian candidate for District 52. I'm running to support our communities and our local economy. I was happy to be invited to the pre-primary forum that was unfortunately canceled. And when I received a call about this pre-election forum and discovered that it too may be canceled, I was more than happy to offer my team of 39 volunteers to help produce a solution that's innovative and allows for the access to the political process for our constituents. Thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing this. I believe that we must reduce the cost of living by reducing local tax burdens. When I talk to residents of the district, I hear that their property taxes are often between 2 and 5 times their mortgage. Local governments are forced to hike their property taxes due to unfunded state mandates. This comes from state policy. That's why I'm running for a state position. I won't rest until the system is deflated, and I believe there is a lot of waste to be cut without harming those in need. Libertarians are the party that can step in and solve problems by mitigating this tiny space between a rock and a hard place. This is where our residents find themselves. When the two main parties struggled to put this forum together, it was the Libertarians who showed up to provide assistance for us all to talk today. And I'm proud to have been a part of that. We're here to provide more options for your life. We believe that social services, while necessary, are not always the best way to solve social problems. We want to unleash human potential to serve and assist communities in ways that the government cannot do by itself. Having often been failed by the systems and then provided for by my community, I'm living proof that that can work. But hard times have come and harder truths will follow. Libertarian State Senator Laura Epke of Nebraska was able to put together a tripartisan coalition to reduce barriers to entry in the workplace for everyone, and particularly various sects of our communities that are not normally well employed. In a historic occupational licensing bill referred to as one of the best in the country, she was only able to pass it because she was neither a Republican nor a Democrat. The coalition of people she worked with couldn't work together by themselves. They needed another option, another voice, who could reach people of similar values to assemble the votes needed for the reform to make it through the Senate. Between 2/3 and 3/4 of our district consists largely of agriculturally viable land that largely goes unutilized because small farms have gone out of business. Our farmer suicide rates are high and have been for some time. Subsidizing large dairy with taxpayer funds only to then dump milk every year for the last few decades has wasted our resources at both ends. We must allow small farmers to sell their products directly to consumers and local retail outlets with fewer burdens. If they stay within New York and without the current extreme expense imposed upon them. We have the ability to produce a wider variety of better, more in-demand products, and we should seek to do so. Farm to table is a trend that is going strong throughout the country, and that is something we really need to support. We should expand hemp farming and legalization of medical marijuana without a huge tax burden to those with illnesses such as cancer. This could also be an important cash crop for our struggling economy that offers more environmentally friendly material for a variety of products, from biodegradable plastics to textiles and building materials such as insulation. We should be at the forefront of this developing market. We have the land to do this. More hemp also allows production and cost decrease of CBD, which is critical for the option of pain relief without the use of opiates, and has been shown to directly improve conditions such as my own. We need access to healthier natural medicines to curb our addiction crisis and lower our healthcare costs. Now, again, I'm Thomas Daniel Queter. I am more than happy to be involved with the community. We've been traveling the district for months now, seeing all the small communities, talking to small businesses, talking to individuals. And I'm happy to say that I'm finding support from both sides of the aisle in this state, as well as our independents and other third parties. I concede the rest of my time.
Thank you, Tom. We'll now move on to State Senator Akshar.
Tucker, thank you very much. First, let me thank my opponent, Mr. Queter, for engaging in this back and forth today. I think it's incredibly important for democracy as we know it. I had the good fortune of being with Mr. Queter at a chamber event within the last 10 days or so. And I was encouraged by the conversation and the topics that we discussed that day. Tucker, I want to thank you as well for stepping up and helping out to ensure that we could get this forum off the ground. You know, I have been serving in the state Senate for the last 5 years, and I'm seeking my third full 2-year term to the state Senate. During that short tenure, I've had the good fortune of having very broad bipartisan support throughout the district. The district, as you all well know, is incredibly big. It's incredibly diverse, and I'm very pleased to say that we have worked very hard on a daily basis and sought broad bipartisan support for the work that we are doing. Really, our campaign this year in our tenure in state government really has been rooted in 3 things. It's been rooted in accessibility, approachability, and the willingness to listen to all of our constituents, regardless of political persuasion, regardless of what letter they have next to their name, because at the end of the day, when you're elected to office, you represent everyone, even people that don't necessarily agree with you in terms of public policy or otherwise. I think that we have, again, during our short tenure, kept to those promises that we've made to the people. And we've done so really through hard work, having a great team of people, and really keeping an incredibly busy schedule. Now, that has been really thwarted the last 6 or 7 or 8 months because of COVID-19 and you know, the public really by and large being shut down, and you know, travel being restricted. But nonetheless, we have adapted and overcame, and started to do virtual town halls rather than in-person town halls. I'm very pleased to announce that during our short tenure, we've held over 40 in-person and virtual town halls. The team and I think that those are incredibly important. Now, these are town halls in which we don't screen participants. We don't only invite Republicans. We invite everyone. We don't screen people before they show up. We allow everybody to come in, and some of those discussions can become tumultuous at times, but that's okay. There are some people in the audience that vehemently disagree with me on a vote I may have taken or a position I may have taken in regards to public policy. But again, that's okay, because we represent everyone. So we're going to continue to do that, because I believe in my core that that is the appropriate way to represent people, is to travel and to listen to everyday New Yorkers. And that really should shape your public policy positions as you're working as an elected leader in Albany or locally at home. So the accessibility piece has been incredibly important to us. And as important really has been our advocacy for the people that we are so proud to represent here in the 52nd Senate District. And that advocacy really is based on that third tenet of listening in terms of what our office looks like. Much of my direction that I take in terms of advancing a piece of legislation or advocating for funding in Albany to bring back home to the district is based not in what I think is good for the community, but in what we've heard the people in the community say. So I point to something, again, as I pointed to in the chamber event, we had a few years ago, we were able to reform the workers' compensation system. It was a piece of what I consider a historic piece of legislation because the system hadn't been touched in the last decade. A $10 billion a year system, 49% of the monies that were collected were going to the injured worker. And through a bipartisan effort, working with Republicans and Democrats alike, bringing organized labor to the table, the medical society, the trial attorneys, all of those large statewide groups, we were able to save over $1 billion in the system and pass that along to business owners, not-for-profits, and the like. And that issue arose from our Small Business Advisory Council right here in Senate District 52. This is not something that I dreamed up or somebody in Albany thought about and said, hey, Fred, you should work on this. This is a piece of public policy or a piece of legislation that was really put on the table by the men and women who own businesses right here in the Southern Tier. So we were incredibly proud of that. And it just goes to the advocacy point, right? That you have to have a willingness as an elected leader to travel. You have to have a willingness to listen to your constituency, and then to pick up the torch and run with it, if you will, and bring that message back to Albany and really produce a tangible result. The Senate district needs that. It needs a representative who can produce a tangible result, not someone who makes empty assertions or hollow promises. It needs somebody that's going to work for them. And I am incredibly proud of our record. I'm incredibly proud of the results that we have produced for the people of this district, whether, again, it's the workers' compensation issue. One issue that has been incredibly important to me from the time I was elected was to bring the heroin and the opioid crisis to the forefront of the minds of elected leaders. Whether you were from Brooklyn, you were from Buffalo, or you were from Binghamton, it was incredibly important that we brought this issue to the forefront. And I'm proud to say that we have. We've made historic investments from a state perspective through the state agency OASIS, in which we are investing we've significantly increased the amount of money that we're spending in terms of that state agency to help people with substance use disorder. And not only from a statewide perspective, but being able to help the people of the Southern Tier by bringing a drug treatment center here to the Southern Tier so we can take a regional approach and get people the help that they need has been incredibly important. It's a result, just like workers' compensation. And I'm very, very proud of the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars that we've been able to bring back home for things like Encore Plus, which is a breast screening program administered by the YWCA that's helped over 4,000 low-income women ensure that they get breast cancer screenings, whereas they would not be able to afford the screening because of insurance issues or the like. Whether it be ag in the classroom, right? It's been noted by some that the only thing I care about is large dairy farms. Nothing could be further from the truth. The fact that we stood up very early on in our tenure, an ag in the classroom program where we've brought agriculture back into the public school systems. And we've been able to implement that program in more than 15 schools throughout the Southern Tier. I'm very proud of that. Investing in the Windsor School District and the Owego Free Academy School District, more than $500,000 to build agriculture labs to teach kids about the importance of agriculture. And I'm an Afton boy. I grew up in Chenango County in the southern part of Chenango County. Thomas, you and I are close neighbors if I were still in Afton, not that long of a drive to Mount Upton. So I understand agriculture. I understand its importance. And that's why we stood up a program like Ag in the Classroom and have seen its expansion throughout the last couple of years. Supporting our first responders, whether it be increasing transparency by funding body-worn camera programs. It's something that has been very, very important to us. Supporting the local fire departments so they can get the equipment that they need to keep all of us safe. Farm to school, right? Where we have the agriculture community that is growing produce and the like, and we're getting that into our public school systems so kids can eat locally grown and healthy food. So those are results, and that's what the people of this district deserve. And if I am fortunate enough to be reelected to my third full 2-year term, that's what we're going to continue to do. We're going to continue to advocate fiercely for the people who live in this district. That may upset people in Albany. I don't make many friends in Albany because I stand up and I speak out for the people that I so proudly represent. And that's okay with me because I'm not going to Albany to make friends. I'm going to Albany to ensure that the people of this district have a loud and energetic voice. And things, of course, have changed in Albany. We have one party rule now where the New York City Democrats are in complete control of the executive chamber and the legislative branches. And yes, that becomes problematic. You may have lost your vote on the floor of the Senate, if you will, but we certainly haven't lost our voice. And if we are fortunate enough to be reelected, we'll continue to be that voice. So again, I thank my opponent, Mr. Queter, for his willingness to participate in this back and forth today. I look forward to the questions. And Tucker, again, I thank you and Emmanuel for hosting this.
Thank you, State Senator Akshar. So we'll now move on to question and answer. There are a few opportunities here for attendees. If you would like to use the raise your hand function, we will see you come up and we will call on you. Someone has already used the question and answer feature and another person has used the chat feature. So we will, and I see that the question and answer question is directed at one candidate. Both candidates will have the opportunity to answer either question, and we will only have one answer per candidate, so no rebuttal, but candidates are welcome to answer or respond to the other candidate's answer in their next response or in their closing statement. So we'll start with the question in the chat channel. It is, what can we do to stem out migration of our children to areas with lower taxes and more economic opportunity? We'll start with Mr. Akshar.
You know, listen, for me, this comes down to one word, and it's affordability, right? People are leaving the state because they can't afford to live here. Something my opponent and I agree on is the property tax issue, right? People are saying to me, just like they are him during his travels, that their property taxes are very, very high. So when we started to hear about this issue, we didn't just continue to listen. We immediately advanced a piece of legislation that will solve this problem. Now, others in Albany have not taken up the mantle and helped walk this issue forward. And it's an issue that we continue to work on. But one of the biggest drivers of the property tax expense is Medicaid and the local share of Medicaid. And we have a piece of legislation that would force the state to take over the local share of Medicaid. And if you look at the numbers statewide outside of the 5 boroughs, that would save a significant amount of money. It would cost a significant amount of money to take over the local share, about $3.5 billion. But for me, this is wants versus needs, right? If you're looking to reduce people's property taxes by on average 30% statewide outside of the 5 boroughs, you take over the local share of Medicaid. Where do you get the $3.5 billion from? Because it's a significant amount of money. You take it from the economic development money that the governor budgets for every year to the tune of $8 billion. Where I come from, either where I was raised in Afton or where I now live in Enwell, in every place in between. There is not a single person I've met that would not happily welcome a 30% reduction in their property taxes. And not to go down the rabbit hole, but in my humble opinion, those economic development dollars are not well spent. They do not produce tangible results. They do not make life better for the everyday average New Yorker. What would stop that out-migration of people, what would keep our younger people here in New York State is if we made New York more affordable. And that is one of the ways that we can do that. And we have to continue to reduce the tax burden, not just property taxes, but the income tax rates. There's a conversation happening right now amidst this global pandemic. Those in charge in New York City have stood up a tax hike task force, right? Could you imagine this? Creating a task force on how we increase taxes on people. We are ranked 49th in the nation in terms of business friendliness and the tax climate. The last thing we should be doing is increasing taxes. We should be finding a way to lower taxes. And we have a solution, an actual real solution that we are trying to move forward in both houses of the state legislature, because that is a real tangible result. And that is something that will make New York more affordable and keep more people here. We lose 250 people a day. In the last decade, we've lost 1.4 million people from the state of New York. And as I argue with the governor sometimes directly, it is not because of the weather. It is not because New York is cold. It is cold, but people aren't leaving because of the weather. They're leaving because New York is unaffordable.
Thank you, State Senator Akshar. Now, Mr. Queter.
My opponent is absolutely right about a few of those things, and I applaud his initiative to reduce the property taxes, as well as the income tax. I believe we're one of the highest state income taxes in the country. There's other reasons that people leave New York. As a disabilities advocate, I saw anyone with a disability who had the means start fleeing New York as they widened the state-based health care, because we all saw that the quality of that healthcare was going to go down. And it has. I was subject to that. And that's exactly why we need to bolster our communities and our small businesses, because we help each other better than the government can. The government is not always the solution. We also need to address things like luxury taxes, because New York, specifically in the fall and other seasons, we have some tourism that brings in some money, particularly to upstate. We all know what leapers are and that they come here to spend their money. Our vehicle rental tax went up by 12% this January, and our bed taxes are typically higher than the minimum. Why we need to have a minimum for a bed tax, I don't understand, but perhaps making it more amenable for our tourists to come in every year and spend that money would make it easier for those who produce things that those tourists buy to make a living. And in this situation with COVID-19, we're obviously not going to have much tourism. And that's very unfortunate for those who are struggling. We lost over 100,000 small businesses in this state this year. That's pretty nuts. I really feel like reducing the income tax burden on small businesses would greatly help our situation. More businesses, more jobs. And nationally, small businesses cover approximately 40% of the jobs that we have in this country. To favor, say, Walmart over all of our small businesses is kind of a misstep, in my opinion, particularly in a pandemic. Small businesses hold fewer people. That's less spread. Walmart holds an awful lot of people. That's more spread. And I really feel like with more advice and less punishment, we could handle a situation like this better. When we address a large group of people and we come down with things like fines, you're going to have a certain amount of them rebel. I actually see this when I'm out canvassing. There are businesses rebelling and not practicing. And it's almost as if that is just because they were threatened with a fine. Perhaps releasing an informational and giving advice is better than trying to tell people what to do. You know, orders and advice are taken in very different ways from individuals. Advice is taken more kindly orders tend to elicit some rebellion and some lack of cooperation. We'll get more cooperation if we take a more adversarial or advisory role. So we need to improve our local economies. We need to give our small businesses the freedom to do what they do.
Thank you, Tom. We will go to the question that was posed in the question and answer. It was to just State Senator Akshar, but it will be for both candidates to answer. It is, what are your stances on the legalization of marijuana? We will start with Mr. Queter.
So I have some interesting experience here. I was, I think, 10 years old the first time a doctor pulled me aside and said, try marijuana. And that was partially due to the fact that I was prescribed an overdose of opiate when I was 8 years old. I don't think that opiates should be disallowed in medicine, but I do absolutely think they've been overused. I was once offered OxyContin for a sinus infection. I think that's pretty ridiculous. We all know what a pill mill is, and thankfully they're going the wayside now. But marijuana in particular, as an advocate for those who have substance abuse disorders, and as someone who counsels people with substance abuse disorders, I've seen it help people get away from prescription opiates, particularly those with disabilities, have chosen to use marijuana, even illegally, to get away from things like fentanyl and OxyContin. I have seen addicts of heroin and cocaine use marijuana to get away from it, and even away from alcohol. I think it's a better option. I don't think anybody really gets violent after they smoke a little marijuana. But CBD in particular, now this is where it comes in. Studies from other countries have shown that CBD increases the interconnectivity of collagen type 1 in bone, particularly when a fracture is healing. My condition is, the layman's term, is brittle bones disease. I had over 1,000 fractures as a child, still graduated high school on time with an advanced Regents diploma. That meant sometimes carrying my books with broken arms. But here's the thing, it's proven to work for some things. It's proven to help cancer patients. It's proven for anxiety disorders. And I believe it is just outright wrong to deny the people something that could be locally grown, locally produced, and more natural with a lower cost to the system. Our prescriptions cost an awful lot of money. The other drug that helps my condition, while it's made here and I could have it purchased and administered for a few $100s a round in Mexico, costs about $4,500 through the system in this state. Perhaps these other means are worth trying. I think there's enough evidence out there.
Thank you, Mr. Queter. State Senator Akshar.
Well, Tucker, the question is kind of open-ended. I'm not sure what your anonymous viewer is asking, but let me start on the medicinal piece. Marijuana for medicinal use is already legal in the state of New York. People already have access to that, albeit sometimes problematic in terms of the healthcare system. But nonetheless, those that need marijuana for medicinal purposes, it's already legal in the state of New York to do. And it is something that I have supported in the past. I supported its expansion for medicinal purposes. I talked during the outset about our work and advocacy in terms of those with substance use disorder. And this was a piece in which I thought that you could, in fact, reduce the amount of prescribed opioids that were being given to people throughout communities across the state and the nation, quite frankly. So it's something that I support. It's something that I have voted in favor of its expansion. But I think it's important for the attendees to recognize that it is already legal in the state of New York. If your anonymous attendee was asking if I supported specifically the legalization of marijuana for recreational purposes, my answer very simply is no.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any questions, more questions from attendees here?
We're happy to take them.
Yes, we are.
Give a moment.
And Tucker, one more time, if somebody wants to ask a question, how can they do that?
Yes, you can either raise your hand. There's the raise your hand function at the bottom part of your screen, or you can type into the question and answer, or you can type into the chat. All three are available. Okay, while we wait, we will go to a more generic question, and hopefully we have some attendees come forward. Maybe it'll spark something for you that you hope to ask either of these candidates. So we're going to go pretty general here. How do you feel that the coronavirus situation has been handled by the state government, and how would you propose we move forward? We will start with State Senator Akshar.
I think there's certainly no playbook, right, for a global pandemic. So how does one prepare adequately? I think that in terms of getting folks the resources that they need, I think the state is doing the best job that they possibly can, whether it be PPE or other type of things that they may need to address this. I think one of the state's greatest failings during this pandemic has been really what I would describe as government overreach, where you have a situation again where, in all fairness to the governor and his team, it's not like they're looking at a playbook with best practices on how to deal with the global pandemic. But this idea or this notion that you have these blanket edicts that come down every day, and we're going to shut down this community or we're going to shut down this industry. My opponent raises the point, right, about a small business versus a Walmart, or I use the example of Home Depot. Why is it that a small business on Main Street, New York, can't open his or her doors, but yet Home Depot can continue to open their doors and flourish and prosper? I think if we're looking back on the last 6 or 7 months, I think that's probably been one of the biggest struggles and one of the biggest frustrations for not only small businesses, but not-for-profits and for school districts, is that, at least from my perspective, it seems as though we hear about a rule that may take place, or you have to meet this certain criteria by Friday at close of business. And at Friday at lunch, everybody has prepared up until that point to open up their doors on Saturday, and then mysteriously the goalpost gets moved yet again. So I think there's been a great deal of frustration in terms of the daily or weekly edicts that come down, and then that goalpost being moved on a somewhat regular basis. So I think this is new for all of us, right? It's not something that any of us have been through before. But it's certainly been a learning experience, and I certainly think that we could do a better job on a daily basis. And I think that comes by way of not making decisions from the governor's mansion, not making decisions based solely at the state capitol, but again, by going back to one of those very core tenets of our tenure in the state Senate, and that goes back to listening. To actually being part of a conversation at the ground level about how these rules or edicts are actually affecting people on a daily basis, and then making decisions with everyone's best interest in mind.
Perfect. Thank you, State Senator Akshar. Mr. Queter?
So New York failed in a lot of aspects of this, and my opponent's absolutely right. The blanket type approach doesn't work very well. When distilleries offered to make hand sanitizer, the state government decided to go to prison labor, and I'm hearing that sanitizer, the pumps don't work well, and it doesn't smell good, and people don't want to use it. If you're going to provide sanitizer for a pandemic situation, perhaps allowing distilleries who already know what they're doing to switch over to making hand sanitizer would not only ensure that sanitizer is available, but help our local economies. I know Remington offered to make ventilators before Governor Cuomo made a veiled threat to use the National Guard to seize upstate ventilators from its facilities, which is ridiculous. But I will remind everyone that New York is the home of the disability rights movement. That's where it started. And to that note, it has deprioritized treating those with disabilities over this pandemic situation. I myself was reaching out and helping individuals who were not getting treatment that they needed, because it wasn't just individuals who were affected with COVID, but individuals who needed regular treatment were going without. And that's pretty tough. That's pretty hard. I know a gentleman who he actually came out of the jail system, and he had PTSD, and he had developed a neurological disorder, and half his body was clenching up, and his family wasn't being very good to him. So in March, he was about to be homeless and disabled in March in New York. I think we could have handled that better. When I was canvassing in Broome, I ran into a homeless gentleman who had just got into rehab for a spinal surgery. He had had half his spine worked on, and the homeless shelters were shut down. Instead of having a place to go, he was living on the street. You know, there are so many aspects of this that were handled wrong. And for those who are anti-gun, I am not. I'm pro gun rights. But for those who are anti-gun, I don't understand how not allowing a company like Remington to switch to making ventilators was a bad thing. I think that would be a win-win in that situation if you were on that side of it. There is another thing that I am aware of. Our SUNY college system recently decided to bring all of its students back. And a lot of them decided to do that without testing the individuals as they came in, and decided to test the sewage systems weeks later. And that's where we saw spikes. We saw this in Oneonta with Tim O'Connor's district. I believe we're seeing this in Broome. I think that was a gross mismanagement. We also expected college students to behave. That's probably, you know, not the wisest expectation. Most of us at that age are a little rebellious. So to that effect, I believe that a less restraining approach, and an approach that was more localized and allowing individual counties to make their own decisions and follow their own numbers, would have done better for all. I really do.
Thank you, Mr. Queter. Do we have any questions from the audience? Again, you can either raise your hand, you can type into the chat, or you can type into the question and answer.
I don't want to speak for my opponent, but I would like to think that we would both encourage that.
Absolutely. And that's
All right.
here.
In the absence of a question, while we wait for more to come in, let's hit public financing of campaigns. Could we please get each candidate's opinion on the proposals and the implementation of a public finance system for state candidates?
Perfect.
We can start with Mr. Queter, if you'd like.
Well, I think all candidates should be funded voluntarily by donations from their constituents. I do not believe in any form of taxation that goes to a campaign. I know that's coming down the pipeline. I think that's absolutely horrid. I do not believe that tax funds should be used to promote ourselves if we're incumbents, and I do not believe that political parties should be given money that is not theirs without voluntarily being given. Most of my donations come from individuals. I believe there was one company that made a donation. I didn't really want to seek large special interest money. That's kind of against why I'm running. I'm running for the average person, those in the communities, and those who want better representation. And so those are my supporters. And I think we've done pretty well that way. It's a tough time to be asking people for money, but we need to realize that to take money is wrong. To accept what's being offered is a different story. And I do not agree with any kind of state legislation that gives money to any political party or any political candidate that is not chosen to be given by the individuals that money came from.
Yeah,
Perfect.
there are a lot of bad public policies that come from Albany, but this ranks, in my humble opinion, near the top. I am vehemently opposed to the public financing of campaigns. Just want everybody, all of the attendees, to think about this for a moment. Going into this budget cycle, going into this legislative session, the state was faced with a $6 billion deficit. $6 billion. Which is a significant amount of money. And now the deficit is around 14 or 15 billion, due in large part to COVID-19, in addition to the 6 billion. At a time when we were facing a $6 billion deficit, those in charge, namely from New York City, and others, even who hold elected office that represent upstate New York, who voted for this budget, voted yes for the public financing of campaigns, which cost $100 million. Think about that for a moment. $100 million of taxpayer money that would go into a pot to provide matching funds for people like Mr. Queter and I. It's something that I wholeheartedly disagree with. Not just because we're faced with a deficit, but because it's just plain wrong. If somebody wants to support me financially, or they want to support Tom financially, that is their right. They work hard for their money, and if they choose to give it to either one of us, that's their right to do so. But the notion that state government would impose a tax on the hardworking backs of New Yorkers, so Tom and I could run a radio ad or buy a lawn sign or go up on television, I think is just plain wrong. It sends a terrible message, but the reality is that there will be countless elected officials who, in fact, do participate in a system like that. Look no further than New York City's public financing system, wrought with fraud, waste, and abuse. Forget the waste, just fraud and abuse. And to think that we would do something like that statewide is just it's unacceptable to me. It's nothing that I would ever participate in, and I too am incredibly proud that we have seen a long history of folks that have supported us financially and publicly. But we're talking about financial support now throughout our tenure in office. And the majority of my donations from individuals are coming from people within the Senate district, District 52. And we're very proud of that. Those donations range very widely, right? From a very low dollar amount to very high dollar amount. And I'm just blessed to have the support of so many people throughout the district that are supporting us.
Thank you, State Senator Akshar. We have a question in the chat. I'm going to try to paraphrase. This is a little bit long. It asks, why are we talking about overreach? I'm assuming it is about coronavirus. When we have seen that disciplined social distancing, supported by competent leadership, manages virus transmission. How would either of you provide leadership that will translate into virus control? We'll start with State Senator Akshar.
Well, I just want to make sure that I understand the question. So are we suggesting by way of the question that we've seen good leadership to date and there is social distancing that is taking place? Tucker, walk me through the question one more time. I'm sorry.
Sure thing. And Ms. Watford, feel free to comment in the chat to clarify your question. But what I'm reading here is, in regards to coronavirus, is saying that disciplined social distancing supported by competent leadership has been able to manage virus transmission, and asking how would either of the candidates provide leadership that will translate into virus control.
I guess the question, right, or talking about competent leadership is all up to the person who is thinking that. I mean, one would argue that we have not seen competent leadership in terms of the nursing home issue. That's why we're calling for an independent investigation as to why thousands and thousands of New Yorkers lost their lives within the confines of nursing homes. I said again during the outset that there was no playbook that the governor had. I think if you're asking specifically about what type of different leadership that I would provide in terms of dealing with the pandemic, I think it goes back to, New Yorkers are smart. New Yorkers are resilient. New Yorkers have to have the ability to make decisions for themselves. And, they've not been able to do that. I think for the vast majority of New Yorkers, you're seeing them wear masks. You're seeing them socially distance themselves from others. They're doing the very best they can. But I think, in terms of the definition or the description of competent leadership, I think that's really up to the person who is, I guess, evaluating what we've seen to date.
Thank you, State Senator Akshar. Mr. Queter.
So competent leadership, it's an interesting way to phrase that. When I was canvassing, I have actually run into businesses that have a sign on their door that say no mask required. And when I asked the owner why it says that, it tells me because when they call Albany, they can't get a straight answer. So I don't know how competent that is when they can't get a straight answer. Competent leadership often should not require force. Good ideas do not require force. Again, we're back to fines and force. I believe that more people would listen if advised than forced. Now, competent leadership, that's a very interesting way to put that. I don't think competent leadership would deprioritize treating those with cognitive disabilities during a pandemic. And we actually should have a playbook to some degree for this. We've seen the swine flu. We've seen other pandemics in history. We know how people react when the government makes rules in this manner. We really do and should have a playbook. The other part of that playbook should be being prepared. Our governor turned away masks in the beginning of this that were at the docks in New York City because they didn't have FDA approval. That's actually something in which the state should defend our safety. The FDA is nice, but some situations come up that happen too quickly and the FDA can't react. Now, we went from refusing those masks to advising everybody to have cloth masks, which, while I do believe they help, I don't think they're as good as some of the masks out there. And perhaps refusing those masks was a bad idea, as we saw in the beginning of this in New York City. Furthermore, I am disabled. I do rely on some services. I have a disability aid. It was April, late April, when my aide was given a letter advising him to use a mask. I'm at risk. I know how to control my contagious my situation of being at risk. I'm at risk for the flu as well. So, washing our hands and good practices is already there. Then in late May, we received a cloth mask. I remember seeing a press conference. A lot of people had donated cloth masks and sent them to the governor, and they were hanging on the wall. I don't know what good they're doing hanging on the wall, but perhaps they should have been utilized. And again, back to leadership, distilleries could have very quickly switched over to making hand sanitizer back when we were seeing the potential for some shortages. Much more quickly than we could have organized prison labor to make an inferior product. And I don't think it's great leadership to tank our economy right now. I think there were better ways to go around that, better ways to handle that. Great leadership would have found better solutions. Now, it's hard to fault someone for acting in a situation that they are not familiar with, but a good leader would utilize resources and experts who actually know what they're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Queter. We have one more question that was in the chat, and then we are moving into our closing statements. The question is from Mr. Tim O'Connor. Can each candidate offer their favorite solution to set New York State on a better path? We'll start with Mr. Queter.
My favorite solution is more specific to District 52. I believe I said in my opening statement, we are between 2/3 and 3/4 agricultural land. And as you drive around district, you see these old rundown barns and this unused land getting grown over. And that's because we have so many hurdles for our small farmers. And our culture is rife with small farming. I mean, half the kids I grew up with were small farmers, and half the kids that I grew up with are out of state now. Um, the burden of taking on the inheritance of that land and that farm is too great. The property tax burden is too great. The price of milk due to subsidizing large dairy and continuously dumping tens of millions of gallons of milk has kept the milk price at the same price it was in the 60s. If you understand inflation and the rest of economics, you understand that that's not good for a product. A product needs to keep up with the price. And when we do this, our smaller farms, who are largely dairy, they go under, and we see our farmer suicide rate go up. We also need to make it easier for farms to diversify. There are all kinds of products we could be growing much more of. Hops, hemp, goat products, poultry, even rabbits. I've been involved in all of those that were legal and easy to get into, poultry, rabbit, pork, beef. That's been the family way of life. Raising produce. I remember one year under my father, who sold produce to pay our taxes, I was able to raise $1,400 worth of Swiss chard in a single 40-foot row. That's a product, because it was organic, that was in demand. And I think that's amazing, and we need to encourage that. And I'll bring back the topic of farm to table. We talk about this disparity between New York City and upstate. Well, there are farming solutions for that. The restaurants in New York City, they get good money for farm to table food. And they will pay good money for it. We just need to make that easier for them to access from our region. We need to make it easier for our region to produce. I actually sat down with some animal rights activists, and they had a problem with hatching programs in schools, because they would hatch all this poultry and then just release it or put it down once the kids were done learning about how eggs hatch. Well, we are libertarians and we innovate, and here we are on Zoom innovating remotely. Why can't we have a system or a program where these schools in the city use remote video equipment to view farm life, to help them understand what life is like up here and what it takes for their food to get to where they are eating it? That disparity needs to be closed. Everybody needs to understand where their food comes from. And as far as hemp is concerned in particular, there are so many different products we can make from it. Biodiesel, bioplastic, insulation and building products. It doesn't all have to be drugs and marijuana. It can be a viable product. It once was. And it's one of the most productive products per acre that's available. So, you know, I suppose my biggest initiative is to free our farms.
Thank you, Mr. Queter. State Senator Akshar.
Sorry about that. I appreciate the question, and for me, it really comes down to affordability, right? I've often said during my tenure in elected office that it is not government's responsibility to create jobs. It's government's responsibility to create an environment in which businesses, large, small, medium, can thrive and prosper on their own. And to do that, you have to make New York more affordable, whether it be fixing a broken workers' compensation system, whether it be fixing the broken unemployment insurance issue, whether it be dealing with the tax rates, corporate, individual, whatever it may be. Really, for me, that's what it comes down to. And that's what drives much of what we're doing in Albany is really advancing policy that makes New York more affordable or makes New York easier to do business in. I'll give you a perfect example. It's a small business amnesty bill that we authored 2 years ago. It was vetoed by the governor. We went into the minority, and I worked with Senator Kaplan from Long Island, who took over the Economic Development Committee She picked up the bill, made some slight changes, and we were able to pass that in both houses, and the governor signed that into law. And this is where, businesses may find themselves in a little bit of trouble with a state agency because they made a mistake, because they don't understand some rule or regulation, right, that are burdensome, that are far too many. And this bill would provide some amnesty to that business if, of course, the violation wasn't so egregious that it put New Yorkers into harm's way. It is things like that, right? It is things like that particular amnesty bill or the work that we did surrounding workers' compensation that makes it easier to do business in New York State, that makes New York State a little bit more affordable. That really, I think, is how we put New York State on a better path. That's how we keep more people here. That's how we get businesses to expand and grow themselves. If government stopped subsidizing big corporations and spending billions and billions of dollars to add very few jobs, if we stopped doing that and we paid a little bit more attention to those gutting it out on Main Street, New York, those people that are trying to make ends meet in small towns like Afton, where I grew up. Even in the short time that I've been gone from Afton, you drive up Route 7, Afton, Bainbridge, Sydney, you see stark differences from what you did 10 years ago, 12 years ago, 15 years ago. I think that if that doesn't send a very clear message to those in power, specifically this governor, I'm not entirely sure what does. I've said to the governor, I've said to the majority leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, who is from Westchester County, please come to the Southern Tier. Spend a day here with me. Don't fly in on a helicopter. Take your black SUV to the university and then go back to the airport and leave. Spend some time with me on Main Street in Afton or Main Street in Owego or in Norwich to understand the true struggle of everyday New Yorkers, to understand what your regulations and your burdens, how they are creating burdens on everyday New Yorkers. So for me, it really is making New York more affordable, and we're going to continue to advocate for that.
Thank you, State Senator Akshar. We will now move into our closing statements. I would note for both candidates, there are a few additional questions in the chat. If you wish to address those in your closing statements, you are more than welcome to. These will be 3-minute closing statements, so we ask that you stay on time for these ones, and we will start with Mr. Akshar.
Again, Tucker, thank you very much. Emmanuel, thank you to both of you for moderating this. I want to specifically thank my opponent, Mr. Queter, for, again, the back and forth and the dialogue that we've had here today and in recent events. Also want to thank him publicly to all the attendees that are on for all the work that he's doing in the disability community. I have said and advocated and argued very loudly in Albany that as an elected leader, we have a fundamental and moral obligation to take care of those with disabilities, and we are falling short in Albany of doing that. So Tom, I want to publicly thank you for all the work that you're doing in that space at a local level and beyond, quite frankly. So thank you for that. To all the attendees, I am eternally grateful and incredibly humbled by the support that we've received throughout this district. You know me, you know what I stand for, and I'm respectfully asking for your vote on November 3rd so I can continue to serve the people of this district and ensure that you have a loud and energetic voice in Albany. I think it's incredibly important, again, that your elected leader is able to produce tangible results that make life a little bit better for all of us, no matter where we're from, whether we're from Afton or Binghamton or Berkshire or Barton. It doesn't much matter, really. We're just advocating for everyone. Ms. Given asked a question. It says, being a Republican, Mr. Akshar, do you denounce white supremacy unlike our president? I think that's half the problem with politics today, the divisiveness that we're seeing. I think the question would have been better phrased, do I denounce white supremacy? Ms. Gibbons, of course I do, unequivocally, 100%. And quite frankly, it doesn't matter if Trump or Obama were the president, if you were a Republican or a Democrat, a libertarian or an independent, everybody should denounce all forms of hate, white supremacy, and others. So, of course, I denounce that, and I do it very loudly, and I do it very, very publicly. Not only here, but if anybody else asked me that question, they would get the same exact answer. So, again, thank you to the folks that have been moderating this. Thank you to everybody who has participated today. Again, I'm respectfully asking everyone for your vote on November 3rd or earlier if you're voting by absentee or early voting.
Thank you, Mr. Akshar. We'll move on to closing statement from Mr. Queter.
So I talk about hemp a lot, but hemp is not the only product that we can produce, and we need to remove the burdens of all of the rural and agricultural products that we can produce. It's a vast resource that we haven't been utilizing. In District 52 and other upstate districts, that is extremely important. That is something that almost anyone can step into and do if we remove the regulations and barriers that keep people from doing that. But with hemp specifically, we also need to improve our ability to process this crop ourselves. Last year, much of the crop was sat still as we awaited processing plants to get traction, and they didn't. We allowed people to grow a product that we didn't allow them to process and utilize, and that was again a loss. When it comes to hemp that's not to be consumed by people, we should not need any testing. If it's going to be turned into insulation, who cares if it has a little bit of THC in it? If it's going to be fed to cattle and it's hemp and not marijuana, I don't see a reason to test it. The other thing we did was that we did actually force some farms to burn their crop because it was just a little bit over the regulation. That's insane. We incentivized an industry and then we forced them to burn it. I would also come out and state that I am against the SAFE Act. The Republican Party in this state, they made a big stink about not funding it, and then most of them voted to fund it. As an at-risk individual for many things, you see my disability. To the wrong person, I do have victim written across my forehead, and I have had those experiences, and I know so many who have. And many of us are perfectly capable of carrying a concealed firearm. And as far as safety is concerned, while I appreciate our police officers, because I have many who are friends, where I live, the response time is anywhere between 30 minutes and 3 days. People deserve the right to protect themselves, and they deserve to do so without punishment. In Oneida, we saw a gentleman who defended himself with a firearm that happened to belong to his father, who had passed, and the transfer hadn't gone through, and he did 10 months in jail for defending his life and property. I think that's wrong. I will stand up for the principles that I know the people in my district want. I know that what they have, and I know what they ask me for. My opponent was absolutely right that we are here to represent our constituents and we need to listen to them. So if that's what you want, vote Tom. Consider going to my website, tomfor52.com. If you want to volunteer or donate, that's very much appreciated. However, you always have to consider those third options, those other options. That is our constitutional right of assembly. And in this state, they are trying to get rid of all third parties. I would like to see 5 or 6. We need to be able to form tripartisanship, get a coalition of multiple parties that agree so that the broader range of our constituents can be represented. This one and two-sided situation is never going to work out for the majority of people, but you put 3, 4, or 5 in there and we will have a better consensus. Again, thank you for having me, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. I especially want to thank Carol Kaczynski for reaching out to me to begin with in February. I'm glad we could make this happen.
Thank you, Mr. Queter, and thank you to all attendees that participated in this State Senate District 52 session. We will now move into Congressional District 22 with Keith Price. Thank you all for joining us.